Hey there guys, Mikey here, and welcome to the Comic Junkies Corner. So, today I want to talk about something a little bit different. The last two comic/geek culture movies that came out in 2017 had some interesting reception. I of course am referring to Justice League, the latest installment in the DCEU, and The Last Jedi, the latest installment in the Star Wars franchise. Both movies that I, myself, thought were enjoyable, but not without some major issues. Critics and audiences, on the other hand, saw something a little bit different. Justice League was critically panned, but general audiences seemed to enjoy it. The Last Jedi, however, was critically praised, but general audiences were less than impressed. This isn't the first time this happened, but what sparked my interest were the gaps between the critics and audience scores. I'm used to about a 20, maybe a 25 point difference. 30 would be really pushing it. But these scores differed by more than 40 points. So what happened? Were the critics too harsh on Justice League? Were they too forgiving of The Last Jedi? I think these questions are part of a bigger question, and that question is, when should we listen to critics? There's usually two stances when it comes to critics. Some moviegoers are either heavily influenced by the critics and take their word to the bank, or they think that critics are pretentious a-holes and don't know what they're talking about. It's rare that you find someone that's kind of in between. This begs another question. Who's right? I think part of what people forget is that critics are people too. They can be influenced by a film just as much as we can. The difference? It's their job to watch movies. We get to pick which movies we watch. Take me for instance. Out of the 10 comic/geek culture movies that came out last year, I only actually went to see 6 of them. But that was my choice. Now if I were a critic, I wouldn't really get that luxury. Critics watch movie after movie after movie after movie, so the flaws are naturally going to be more apparent to them, and they're going to be less forgiving of these flaws, especially if they've seen them repeatedly. Think of your English and/or writing instructor. Part of their job is to read and grade papers. It can be an enjoyable experience if the paper is well written. I mean, heck, it just made their job a whole lot easier for them. But if they get a badly written one, well, that's when it becomes rough, especially when they get a slew of badly written ones. We should also note that we trust that these instructors know what they're doing. They know how to determine whether a paper is well written or not in terms of structure, vocabulary, etc. Movies and movie critics work in a similar way. So if that's the case, we should be able to trust their word when they determine whether a movie is good or bad, right? Remember when I said critics are people too that can be influenced by a film just as much as we can? Yeah, this system isn't perfect. Remember The Phantom Menace? When it came out, it received very positive reviews. Remember Empire Strikes Back? When it came out, it got mixed to negative reviews. That's right, one of the worst Star Wars films got better reviews upon release than one of the best Star Wars films. How the hell did that happen? Well, again, like I said, critics are people. They, like many people, were so sucked into the hype for Phantom Menace. Not to mention that at the time of release, the technology and effects were pretty breathtaking. They obviously don't hold up today, but back then I can see how someone can get sucked in. The same thing kind of happened with A New Hope. Everyone was so drawn in with the space battles and lightsaber fights that when Empire Strikes Back came out, it was kind of a been there, done that kind of vibe. Even I'll admit, Empire Strikes Back doesn't really offer anything new in the effects department. But do the effects have anything to do with why most of us love Empire? For some of us, yeah. But for most of us, we love the story, the intensity, the messages, the twists, the emotions it evoked from us. It has a good score now, but it took some time to get there. Maybe critics could do with some stricter standardization. With that, we would probably see some scores go up and others go down, but it would still be an imperfect system because it would still be based on opinion. So if critics are supposed to be kind of the authority on movies but have an imperfect system, when should we listen to them? I'd say as often as possible. There seems to be a big confusion with what a critic actually does. A good critic is supposed to review the movie and explain to us why said movie is good or bad based on their interpretation of the film. Their job is not to tell us whether or not to like a movie. There is a big difference, and I feel like a lot of people are getting that mixed up. Critics are here to offer a point of view on a work of art, most likely one that we may not have considered. And believe it or not, movie critics have a major impact on filmmakers. I mean, how can you get better at something if you don't have someone constantly looking over your work and offering criticism and/or advice? It's really not about who's right and who's wrong, it's about interpretation and the ability to articulate and convey those interpretations to others. Which is why it's also important for us as audience members to share our point of view as well. Because just as much as they can help us see movies from a different perspective, we can also help them see movies from a different perspective as well. It's kind of a checks and balances kind of thing, keeping each other honest. Trust me, they notice those gaps too, and when they do, they may go back and say, maybe I was a little too harsh on this movie. Or, you know what, maybe I did overlook some glaring issues. But the same should go for us. We shouldn't be blindly agreeing or blindly disagreeing, it's more of a compare and contrast. It's not the score that's important, it's what's behind the score that's important. What's the reason for it? That's what we should focus on. I think a lot of us have this notion that arguing and conflict is a bad thing. I think that's because most of us associate arguing with fighting and name-calling and insults, etc. That's actually far from the truth. Arguments and conflict are actually very healthy because they help us grow as human beings and teach us to keep our mind open to other people's perspective. I mean, would you really want to live in a world where everyone likes all the same things you like and thinks the exact way you think? And if you do, more power to you, I guess. But for me, just one of me is boring enough. I don't need multiples. Besides, if everyone was the same, we wouldn't have a fraction of what we have in the world today. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this subject. Hopefully I was able to shed some insight on the topic. I'd like to thank you all for tuning into the Comic Junkies Corner on McBlam Entertainment, where we try to bring a little enjoyment to your day every day. And as always, I appreciate you all watching, and I will see you in the next video.